The 22nd gate, the gate of grace, the emotional system, a quality of behavior best suited in handling mundane and trivial situations. What is that quality of behavior? The 22nd gate is really a very unusual gate. It's part of the channel or the potential channel of openness, a design of the social being. And to begin with, this is an emotional gate. And one of the things that's so interesting about the 22nd gate is that the 22nd gate represents the way in which we hear abstractly. In other words, what we call in design the left ear. There's a real difference between the way we hear abstractly and the way we hear logically. That is, the right ear, the 57th gate, it hears things in the now. That is, this is a splenic process, and the hearing is rooted in the splenic condition. And the spleen is spontaneous. So the hearing that you hear, if you put the telephone, for example, to your right ear, whatever you're listening to, you're going to take in its essence, its complete essence, in the moment. But the 22nd gate is different. This is an abstract process related to the emotional system and the way of the emotional system, the wave of the emotional system. And the thing to recognize about the 22nd gate and its capacity to listen, its capacity to be open to the articulation of the other, its harmonic gate being the 12th gate, the gate of articulation, is that it is open, but it doesn't necessarily hear everything, at least not in the now. It's one of the best ways in which we can come to understand the emotional system itself, that the emotional system's frequency, the frequency of the wave, is all about our ability to be able to sample information, to be able to come to a clear conclusion based on a collection of samples over time. And the thing about the 22nd gate as a hearing mechanism is that it only hears certain things in the now. The rest becomes available over time. It's ironic that most human beings will put the telephone to their left ear and in fact do not really hear everything that's being said to them in that moment. And it's only later that they realize that certain things were said that they weren't listening to. So when we're dealing with the 22nd gate, we have to always keep in mind that this is an emotional process and that the openness of the 22nd gate, is a process that is cyclical. The 22nd gate can be very closed off to hearing. In the same way that you can have a radio running in the background and yet you're not really listening to it, nor do you really hear what is there or what is being said. You can kind of block it off, and this is something that the 22 can do. You can see that glazed look in that sense. The other thing is that we're dealing with individuality. We're dealing with the mutative potential of openness. How powerful openness can be. And that to see that the 1222 is the only social mechanism of the individual. So when dealing with the 22nd gate, there is this unique capacity to be open to the potential of mutation. Anyone, who carries the 22nd gate in a defined emotional system is consistently going through these cycles in which over time they can learn to truly grasp what they have heard. But remember something about the open emotional system. There is a great deal of avoidance in the strategy of the open emotional system. And the 22nd gate that's operating out of an open emotional system often refuses to hear anything, but to participate behaviorally in the action. In other words, to appear to be listening, to appear to be hearing, in order to maintain a social presence, but in fact being very, very deaf to it. And this is one of the dilemmas of the 22 in an open solar plex system. The 47th gate, oppression, in the Ajna center. pointed upwards to the head center, to its harmonic gate, the 64 before completion, forming the channel of abstraction and design of mental activity and clarity. Now the 47th gate is the gate of realizing, but it is a gate that is placed under tremendous pressure. The head center, the center above the center that it is pointed at, is a pressure center. And so the 47th gate has the pressure on it to try to make sense of the abstract. Now what that means literally is to try to make sense of whatever stored memory is available. And it is this stored memory that becomes the source of the pressure on the 47. Unlike the logical process that deals with patterns that can be worked with, that the 47th gate, the abstract process, is always trying to make sense out of experiential snippets, bits and pieces of experiential memory. And the 47th gate oppression is described as a restrictive and adverse state as a result of internal weakness or external strength, or both. Now think about that, because that's quite difficult to grasp. That is, this is a restrictive and adverse state. This process of trying to make sense out of things is restrictive. And it is a result of internal weakness or external strength, or both. Now, what is this adverse state? The whole thing about the process of trying to make sense out of things is that you never truly get to a resolution. In many ways, trying to make sense out of something is trying to come to a point of clarity emotionally. And the abstract process and the emotional process are deeply connected to each other. Everything about the process of making sense out of things is very similar to the process of coming to clarity. That is, the common denominator is time. Time. If one has the 47th gate and it is part of a definition, in other words, that the head and ajna center are going to be defined, then there is a consistent process at work. But it's very, very difficult if one just simply has the 47th gate and it's in an undefined ajna center. Then it's very difficult because you don't have the opportunity to consistently over time try to make sense out of the same thing from different experiential memories. Whenever you look at the first line, you look at the foundation of a hexagram. And the first line of the 47 is taking stock. It says the ability in times of hardship. There's already a presumption of the difficulty of what it is to try to make sense out of things. The hardship to concentrating on eradicating negative factors that led to the oppression. Realizing that negative thoughts have to be eradicated. Now, one of the most important things for the abstract mind is to discover positiveness. It's very important for the abstract mind. The tendency of the abstract mind is to be littered with negative thoughts. Without clarity, without certainty, without absolute fact, the process of realization is very, very difficult. And of course, because there are so many different ways that one can interpret experience, that it's full of difficulties and it's full of negative thoughts. The detriment is the delusion of seeing oppression as exclusively external. And this is about the sense that the world is against you. So you can see right away that if you're carrying the 47th gate, and that you are not self, which means that your mind is your inner authority, then your inner authority is going to be deeply driven by its negative thoughts, and it's going to be deeply driven by the sense that one is fighting against everything and everyone. And obviously that is something that can be very difficult. The great value of the 47th gate is that because life is for humanity an experiential process, we need its capacity to try to realize and make sense out of experience, but as outer authority, not as inner authority. As inner authority, Making sense becomes an enormous burden, and it misdirects the life.
Time was oppressing realization. Time is gracefully open. בעוד פחות מחצי שעה. ונלך רגע להציץ על כן, ובאיות אנחנו ב-35.5. והצצה קטנה כמה נשארו לי? להכין. גייטס, הנה. אז רק נסמן וי פה על... וניקח בצהוב. זה תלוי למעלה. עכשיו אנחנו רגע. נשאר פה. זה מוכן כבר. וזה מוכן. וזה. אז פה נשאר 2. פה נשאר 1. 2. יאללה, קיצר, אנחנו כבר לקראת הסוף. נשארו אולי עוד איזה שבוע וחצי, שבועיים לסיום טינה ניי. זהו.